Okay, you all. Well, let's go ahead and get started on today's lecture, or I should say this week's lecture. We're going to be talking about team members and how that relationship between team members can be stronger or weaker depending on attitudes, behaviors, expectations, etc. And we're also going to be talking about team leadership. So those are the two main topics that we're going to be discussing. So without further ado, let's get into it. So agenda for this lecture is we're going to talk about team slayers, and contrary to pop culture, when we say slay, it means usually a good thing. This instance, team slayer, it's not a good thing. So let's make sure we don't get that confused. And then we're going to talk about egocentrism. We're going to talk about cynicism. We're going to talk about verbal and nonverbal abuse in groups. We're going to talk about team removal. And we're going to talk about team builders. So this lecture is going to be very video heavy. So for you guys, like I said in previous lectures, all the lectures are with the mindset that it's for my in-person class. So I have a lot of videos for them. So for you guys, your videos will be posted in the discussion board, and that's what you'll be responding to this week. These videos are a little bit more lengthier, so there will be plenty for you guys to respond to. So let's get into it. So Team Slayers, they're bad news. Like I just mentioned, there are things, these are people that you do not want in your group by any means. And here's a quote from Maxwell. Quote, good attitudes do not guarantee a team's success, but bad attitudes guarantee its failure. So humans by nature are negative animals. We are mammals that are by nature negative. We thrive off of negative energy. And that is just what we were programmed to do. If you think about it, it's a lot easier to be negative than it is to be positive. It's a lot easier to be down in the dumps than it is to be radiantly positive. We have to work at being positive. Some people are more inclined to be positive. Of course, there's definitely people that are more um, to be positive. It comes easier to them. But the fact is, we still have to work at it. We still have to work at being positive and happy throughout life. But being negative and unhappy is very easy to do. So, same concept here. The team slayer, it's a really easy thing to fall into. And that's what we don't want. So we have to make sure that if a member is exhibiting signs of being a team slayer, we need to address it and we need to confront it. Egocentrism. The key words here, obviously, in egocentrism is ego and then centrism, right? So ego meaning someone who has thinks highly of themselves, and they think that they're the best. They think that they're one in a million. And then centrism, it comes from the word center, so it means literally ego-centered. Okay, so that's what we're looking at with egocentrism. So again, it's going to be me-oriented. Egocentrism is me-oriented. So me versus we-oriented. So in a group, you're with other humans, so you should be we-oriented. You should not be me-oriented. You shouldn't be looking at what's going to bring you the best success and the best grade. You should be looking at how you can make sure that your whole group receives a good grade. Okay? Bloated egos. So egocentrism is really a bloated ego. Someone, like I said, who thinks that they are the best, thinks that they are one in a million, they think that they're the king or queen or whatever, they think they're royalty. So bloated egos are very detrimental, very not conducive to the learning environment and not conducive to um, not conducive to the learning environment. So we need to make sure that we have our egos in check. We have to make sure that we're not allowing egos to flourish. So bloated egos can literally destroy teams. They can foster defensiveness and they can perpetuate errors from egocentric control freaks who desire to protect their image more than correct their mistakes. So that is something to look out for. If a member is exhibiting a sign of doing that, it's good to call it out for what it is, and address it directly. Okay, so cynicism. It's communicating a can't do attitude. So it destroys teams. So teams are systems. So even a single member can demoralize an entire team. And think about what I said earlier in terms of humans being inherently negative. If one person can affect the whole team by being negative and having a can't do attitude, that just goes to show supports the idea that humans are inherently negative. Because if it was so easy for that one person to demoralize the whole team, then it shows that humans are inherently reactive to negativity and they absorb it. Okay. So cynics communicate negativity by predicting failure and looking for someone or something to criticize, sapping the energy from the team with their negativity. So cynicism is it's like a disease. It constantly spreads and it seeks new hosts to latch on to. And the attitude and the behavior associated with it are also contagious. So it's a very toxic environment. It's something that you do not want in your team. So we want optimistic, not pessimistic individuals in our groups. What you want in a team member is the communication of an optimistic person, a can do attitude, not a cynical can't do attitude. Okay. Verbal and nonverbal abuse. So this creates defensiveness and it creates defensiveness for the person receiving the abuse. So someone that is constantly belittled in a group setting, especially at work or in meeting rooms or with their boss, who are constantly being abused, they typically result to defensiveness because, like we discovered a couple weeks ago, defensiveness re, um, sorry, is a result of receiving a negative evaluation. So when we perceive someone giving us a negative evaluation, we're going to be reacting in a defensive manner. We want supportive, cooperative communication. This is why at the beginning of the semester I said to make sure that your groups are constantly supported, that you guys are constantly leaning on each other, but supporting each other and creating a positive group climate. Okay, so now we're at the point where, you know, you've done all the things you could do to prevent a toxic group environment, but now it's time to actually just remove that person altogether. So you want to focus on the weakest link, whoever's going to be the weakest link, and typically the person that the team slayer is the weakest link because they're usually not collaborating, they're not usually supporting the team. Because a single member can destroy a system or a group, the weakest link in the chain may have to be removed if it prevents the team from being effective. So get rid of the incompetent communicator. Someone who is incompetent is someone who is the team slayer, someone who is creating hostility and defensiveness. That is the incompetent communicator. Okay. So the principal candidates for expulsion from a team should be those who persistently display incompetent communication, especially if they show no interest in improving. So those are times when you need to be aware and really just get ready to get them out as fast as you can. So let's focus on team builders now. So this is kind of a fun little part of the chapter, building up teams. We focused so far on the lecture about the team destroying aspect. So let's talk about how to build your team. So you need to choose and develop your team members, and you need to focus on core competencies. So the core competencies experience and problem-solving ability. Those are two core competencies that you want to see in every team member. Do they have the necessary experience in that subject matter, whatever you're in a group for? Do they have the ability to solve problems if they come up? Do they throw up their hands when they're met with some pushback, or do they roll up their sleeves and get to work? That's what you want to look for. You also want to handpick your members. You want to actively choose members who you believe have the necessary experience and able to problem solve. In this class, you weren't able to do this. This class is a little bit different in that context of group projects and group communication. This stuff from the textbook is more from a business perspective, but it can be applied to our class as well. You guys didn't get to pick your groups per se, but you did get to pick topics or general themes that you think you'd be interested in based off of previous experience or interest. So you did get that part. You didn't get the handpicking though. I apologize. But each group needs to have some type of cultural diversity. And this does not just mean diversity based off of race or ethnicity. It could also be diversity of thought, diversity of ages, diversity of backgrounds, of socioeconomic factors. It could be many different things. Okay, so that's what we're looking at with cultural diversity. For instance, Americans take pride in decisive decision making, while in Japan and China, they tend to take their time. They speed is not a high priority in those countries. The priority is thoroughly thinking about the situation and coming up with solutions or thoughts about that situation. So one way to bring in cultural diversity is to accept diversity as an advantage, not a disadvantage for the team. You also want to choose team members for their complementary skills and knowledge. So choose team members for their complementary skills and knowledge, but also for their similarity of attitude. Regardless of cultural background, there is no place for egocentrism or cynicism on teams. So what this is saying is to pick groups effectively and to make sure you have a good group, yes, you should have diversity and cultural diversity, but it doesn't mean you sacrifice the team by only choosing people who are culturally diverse. So the idea here is if someone is from a cultural diverse background, but they don't have the necessary experience or problem solving abilities that you are looking for as a team leader, then you shouldn't sacrifice that part, the core competencies, for the cultural diversity. Of course, if you find a candidate and they're culturally diverse and they're a better candidate based off experience and knowledge, then of course, go ahead and pick them, and you should pick them. Okay. Choose a superordinate. So this is something we're going to be learning more later on in this chapter. But it's a transcending goal to bridge differences. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. Be respectful of all team members, and avoid cultural bias. The American way of doing things is not always the best way. So be experimental and try different approaches. And then keep communication open. One of the biggest things we said at the beginning of the semester for a positive group climate is to make sure that everyone has a say, everyone knows that they bring value to the group and that no one is shunned. No one is shunned from the group from bringing up ideas or coming up with ideas. You should always consider those ideas, even if they're not great, still consider them and then talk as a team as to how you can either incorporate them or if you're going to go ahead and not do that plan. Okay, but keep communication open. No one should feel as though they cannot open their mouth and speak their mind. Okay, so now we're getting into building teamwork. So the 4 C's. First one is clear goals. So make sure that everyone is on the same page. A few clear goals that each team member can recite from memory are preferable clear goals to be set, and not the goals shouldn't be numerous. It shouldn't be an extensive list. It should be two or three big overarching goals, cooperative goals. So research clearly shows that cooperative goals enhance team performance. And then this is where subordinate goal comes in from the previous slide. A subordinate goal is a specific kind of cooperative goal that overrides differences that members may have because it supersedes less important competitive goals. Is particularly effective for developing teamwork. So what we're looking at here, here's an example. When a group faces a common predicament that jeopardizes its very existence, survival becomes a subordinate goal that can galvanize members to pull together in common cause. So it's a cooperative goal is something that everyone can partake in, something that is more competitive, more able for people to get their hands on, so they're easily attainable. Then we have challenging goals. These are goals where members need to feel that they are embarking on a shared mission with a common vision of how to translate the dream into a team achievement. So it's super important that everything in this goal section is attainable. And make sure that everything is able to be attained by every group member, regardless of who they are and what role they're playing. So leaders should be able to attain it, and so should other team members be able to achieve it. And then commitment to goals. So commitment is a key element of communication competence, and it's also essential to team success. Quote, without it, groups perform as individuals. With it, they become a powerful unit of collective performance. And that's from Kazenbach and Smith, 1993. So although it's not always possible, whenever a participatory goal setting can be instituted, it is advisable to do so. So we typically respond better to goals that we have had a hand in creating than to those that are foisted upon us by others. So the idea here is that when you guys get to your goal setting, which you guys should have already done, um, everyone should have a say in what the goal is. If someone disagrees, there should be open communication for that person to disagree with what the goal should be. And everyone should have equal um, participation in setting those goals. Okay. Team identity. So a group becomes a team when it establishes its own identity, both to team members and to outsiders. So what we're looking at here is symbolic convergence. So communicating fantasy themes. And this comes from Ernest Borman, 1986, who developed the term symbolic convergence theory. So what he focused on was how people communicating with each other develop and share stories that create a convergence, a group identity that is larger and more coherent than the isolated experiences of individual group members. So an example of the symbolic convergence theory is what we all learned in the United States growing up in elementary, middle school, and high school, at least in the past. Now we're opening our minds a little bit more to what the actual truth is. But the idea that's been taught to us is manifest destiny, right? We were destined as Americans showing up on the East Coast in the colonies and fighting for our independence. We were destined to take over all of the continent or all of the Western expansion, right? There's a common theme, there's a common idea that we are destined to have this land, so we need to go get it. And it's something that was able to get us from the East Coast to the West Coast, right? But it's a fantasy, it's a convergence theory, it's a group identity. That's our group identity. Our identity was to overtake this land. And that's what our identity was for at least 200 years. Okay. Um, and it's more coherent. So more people know the story of Manifest Destiny rather than individual isolated experiences. So, for example, Manifest Destiny was created at a time when most of us wouldn't be a part of that destiny. We would be Americans, but we wouldn't be benefiting from the Western expansion because of our various different identities. For example, women were not included in that Manifest Destiny. Black individuals and brown individuals were not incorporated in that destiny. In fact, indigenous individuals were definitely not considered into Manifest Destiny. In fact, they were the direct opposition to Manifest Destiny. Queer people, all these different groups were not considered when we were looking at Manifest Destiny. However, we are all American, and those are some of our shared identities, and those are our individual coherent um, ideas of what it means to be American, right? But it's not considered a part of the master narrative. So the convergence theory here would be the Manifest Destiny, where it's coherent, it's large, it's broad, and then our individual ideas of what it is to be American are not considered because it's more mass produced in the Manifest Destiny. So I hope that made sense. But there's essentially an underlying theme of fantasies here. So there are dramatic stories that provide a shared interpretation of events that bind group members and offer them a shared identity. So because of that Manifest Destiny identity and that story, that fantasy, we all came together as Americans to ensure that we get from sea to shining sea. So in terms of your group though, that was a little history lesson. Um, in terms of your groups, you need to, unfortunately, don't create something like Manifest Destiny, but create a shared identity. What is something that brings you all together? If you guys played soccer growing up, at least when I played soccer growing up, we had team banners that someone on the team, usually the moms, would create where we would all have our names on there. We would have a team name. We would be the Purple Dragons or something like that. We had a shared identity. We had a team identity where anyone that we were playing against would know that we're the Purple Dragons because of our banner, right? Same thing as a flag. The American flag is a symbol to the world that you are American or that there's American presence in the area, right? So there's a team identity there as well. And that leads us into symbols. So symbols, we use symbols every day. The word symbol is a symbol, right? Those letters that are the SYMBOLS are all symbols, but when you put them together, they become a word, and that word happens to be symbols. And then we assigned a meaning to the word symbols to mean something that resembles something else or that represents something else, right? So we all have symbols that we can assign to our groups so that way we can have that easy recognition of your group and your identity. And then team talk. So the language of we. So quote, a shared language bond or a shared language bonds teams together and serves as a visible sign of membership. So one way that if we use California as an example, one way we know if someone is from um, Southern California, at least, is if they put the word the in front of the freeway names. So I'm from Southern California. So when I refer to Highway 80, I say the 80 or the 50 or whatever the freeway, the 5, right? But someone from Northern California, at least from what I've heard, is that you guys don't say the in front of the freeway. You just say, oh, I take 80 to 5 or something like that. Where in other states like Colorado, they say I 80 or I 50. Okay. But that team language, that team talk is one way to create team identity because then you're easily identifiable into a certain team. Team accountability is a part of this. I didn't put it on here, but it's under team talk. So it means that the team, rather than individual members, assumes responsibility for success and failure. If the team succeeds, everyone succeeds. If the team fails, everyone fails. It's not one person that creates the failure, it's the whole team. Okay. Okay, so how do we ensure that we enhance members' capabilities? There's 4 dimensions here. We have empowerment. So this is the process of enhancing the capabilities and influence of individuals and groups. There's group potency. This is the shared belief among team members that they can be effective as a team. It's a can-do group attitude, and there's a strong relationship between group potency and team performance. Those teams whose members are confident that their team can perform effectively, not just on a single task, but across many different tasks, typically perform effectively, whereas teams with low group potency do not perform as well. Meaningfulness is a team's perception that its tasks are important, valuable, and worthwhile. So team members collectively influence this perception of meaningfulness by their communication. Cynicism, expressed by some team members, can create a why bother attitude throughout the team. Optimism, expressed by team members, can have the reverse effect, convincing members that the team's task is important and worth performing well. When team members view a task as very meaningful, social loathing disappears and they can work harder collectively than they would individually. Autonomy is the degree to which team members experience substantial freedom, independence, and discretion in their work. So autonomy does not mean that teams have no supervision or guidance. There's still that aspect there, but you have more availability to move across the platform. You have more availability to make an impact, which is the degree of significance given by those outside of the team, typically the team's organization, to the work produced by the team. Hierarchy in traditional organization is the enemy of empowerment. One way to ensure that you don't have empowerment in groups is if you have a hierarchical structure where you have like the board, head of the board, then the president, then the vice president, then the area deans, etc., down the pyramid. So empowerment flattens the organizational structure and hierarchy by sharing power. If we have a hierarchical structure, then we're not sharing power. There's clear defined roles and rules and norms for each step of the ladder, step of the pyramid. But if we have a empowerment where everyone has equal opportunity to impact and create meaning in a group, then we are sharing the power. We have a more positive group climate, and there's more flatitude. Quality circles are teams composed of employees who volunteered to work on a specific task and attempted to solve a particular matter or problem. So quality circles actually prove to be a half-hearted attempt to empower workers. Typically, those teams had little autonomy to make final decisions and implement the team's wisdom, and mostly recommendations were offered that could be and were easily ignored by the higher-ups in the organization. So hierarchical organization and quality structures aren't great models. The CEO model is actually a great model to use. It's a way of self-regulating teams to ensure that they complete an entire task. This emerged as a more effective alternative to quality circles. So it's when self-managing work teams embrace empowerment. And after sufficient training and education, all team members shared responsibility for planning, organizing, setting goals, making decisions, and solving problems. And they have a great deal of autonomy. So it's a great model to use for group environments and group projects. One impediment to team empowerment is that there's no buy-in. There's no real reason for someone wanting to join a group or participate in a group. If there's no real benefit to the group for joining, then why would they join? And then some parts of the chapter talk about providing feedback. That is for you guys to start your reading at. So establishing individual accountability, providing feedback, page 217 for the second set of pages to read. That's where we left off in the lecture notes here. So go ahead and read those. But that is what we're looking at with team members and team leadership. And I'll see you guys next week.